most of the music played in English radio at that time was dance band music. Well, and you know, it was very professional, not in the best sense of the word, but being very polished and well, maybe a bit dull. But it was not like saying, "Oh, okay, I can do that, and I want to do that." It was not exactly like that. What really meant a lot about the skiffle craze was that thing that young people suddenly recognized: I can play, I can make music, and I don't have, and it was not about getting some expensive instrument and being so good. They used all this primitive stuff like washboard and DJ bass and an old guitar, and that was it. And then they could make music, and it was very simple music, so they could very fast learn to play that kind of thing. And all over England, there were hundreds of skiffle groups, and there were held skiffle contests and all sort of things. Of course, it was relatively few that came to record their music and such things, but there were some. Of course, Lonnie Donegan, he was called the King of Skiffle. Besides him, there were the Chas McDavid Skiffle Group, and of some importance for the Beatles story, there was the Vipers, led by Wally Whiton. They were actually recording at Parlophone, and most of their recordings was produced by George Martin. Yes. So there's a kind of hint in the story, and at the same time, when John Lennon had his quarrymen playing a similar kind of music, I guess not quite as good as the Vipers, I guess. Hard to say, but I don't think so. There was the Vipers at Parlophone with George Martin somehow involved, being producer, sound engineer, or something. At least involved. As I said, they mostly used quite inferior instruments, washboard, DJ bass, an old guitar or something. But there was a few things around with a bit more, a piano, a trumpet, and such things. And you must remember, I told you it came out of the jazz revival movement. So actually many of those English jazz bands playing in a traditional style, they all had, or most of them at least, had adopted this thing about the skiffle session as a part of the concert. One of those bands were Humphrey Littleton's orchestra. They had a piano player called Johnny Parker. And I guess a lot of people, a lot of Beatles fans may have heard about a famous recording about the Humphrey Littleton Orchestra with Johnny Parker's piano on the lead, a track called Bad Penny Blues. That is actually the inspiration for Lady Madonna. And the story goes on. Humphrey Littleton's orchestra also was at Parlophone Record. And the original Bad Penny Blues, yes, George Martin was in on it. And when about 10 years later, give or take, the Beatles were making Lady Madonna, Paul McCartney wanted that specific sound on the piano, and George Martin went into EMI's storeroom and found that particular microphone they were using to when they recorded Johnny Parker playing Bad Penny Blues, to get as close to his piano sound as possible. So it really is connected to the Beatles story. Also later on, with things that happened there. The word skiffle, there is a uncertainty of where that came from. The most common explanation is that it actually comes back in Harlem in the 20s. If people couldn't pay their rent, they held a so-called rent party, inviting all the neighbors, and all came to join the party and gave a few bucks to be in there. And that way they were collecting money to pay the rent. And there were, at these house rent parties, there were the thing called piano contests or cutting contests. Cutting, yes. Really good piano players were playing and sort of had a musical fight against each other, and, well, move away, I can do better. And it was really great piano players. It was people like James P. Johnson, Fats Waller, the young Duke Ellington. It was such guys. So I guess there had been some quite good piano playing there. And it is said, I don't know if it's true, but it is said that the word skiffle originally meant something like collecting money, pass the hat, something that was the original meaning. And it's kind of funny, the washboard came to play such a essential role in the skiffle music, that sound, and think about collecting money. It's kind of funny, I think. Well, but the word was used later on. There was a jazz band, a piano-dominated jazz band in the 40s called the Skiffle Boys, and that might have something to do with it. But the main inspiration musically was the jug bands. And some of them were quite funny acts. You got that, help, what do we call that in English? When you are watering your garden, that snake, it's not called that in English, but in Danish, snake, the same word are used for snake and that thing you got, and it's quite similar to, watering your garden, whatever ever you call that, putting a mouthpiece for a trumpet into that and making sounds with that, and all kinds sort of things, and some of it very funny stuff. And that was the inspiration, and there were two very important reasons for that. That people were actually quite poor. Most people were actually quite poor in England, so they couldn't buy proper instruments, and that a generation of that the English teenagers suddenly discovered, I can make music, I can play myself. It's not that thing for very professional people, and it's not about getting a very expensive instrument and practice for 10 years and playing scales 5 hours a day. I can get an old guitar, I learn 3 or 4 chords, and I can actually play music. It's as simple as that. Wow! And that was the thing. So, as I said before, there were hundreds of skiffle groups all over England. And yes, one of those were the Quarrymen in Liverpool. And I know this video has not been so much about Beatles particularly, but it's a part of the background for the Beatles story that I think is important to know if you really want to understand how it all began. And it began with the skiffle craze. And that's another kind of music than what's later became too known as the Mersey beat style. Early Beatles and things like Jerry and the Pacemakers, Swinging Blue Jeans, The Searchers, and such things. But some people have studied a lot on, okay, you listen to the first Beatles album originally, I mean, Please Please Me, and you listen to Jerry and the Pacemakers, Swinging Blue Jeans, The Searchers, and all that stuff, and you try to figure out, okay, what was the original Mersey beat style? I don't think you can find any. There were some similarities in what they were doing, and there were some overlapping of repertoire in many of those bands. But I guess each band has had their own little twist on it, so you really can't find the real Mersey beat style. And it's kind of similar to that New Orleans thing, because many people have tried. As I told you, the revival movement was very concerned about finding the real jazz and digging back. Well, if you keep on digging back, you end up with march music, because that is actually how it all began. It began with marching bands turning into something else. And it's the same thing here. You can't find like the Mersey beat style. There are some overall similarities, and you can talk a lot about them. But if you keep digging further and further back, you end up with skiffle and the skiffle craze. the skiffle craze that I told you before started with Lonnie Donegan's version of Rock Island Line becoming a big hit. It was in '56. I told you that. I didn't directly say 56, but I said it was at the same time as in US, Elvis Presley was hitting with Heartbreak Hotel. And I guess it peaked around 57 and a bit into 58, and then we went downhill and other things began to happen. And some of those who got famous as Mersey beat acts had roots in the revival jazz. Swinging blue jeans in their first days, several years before they became famous, had a more jazzy style and were not using electric guitars, but they were playing with a banjo and maybe was there a trumpet or something? I'm not sure. But what I'm trying to say is this is the beginning. And it's some background you need to know to understand all the things that followed. And therefore, please forgive that I haven't talked so much about Beatles particularly in this video, because this is, the background that is kind of need to know. And so I will end my video here and saying, okay, this was kind of the background story. And now we have set the scenes, and we can begin in the next episode looking a bit more to what happened with those Quarrymen guys. That was just one among hundreds of skiffle groups, and not even a very good one. And how did they become the biggest thing that ever happened in pop and rock music? How did that happen? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about in the next episodes. And yes, so I will end here, and I will excuse my bad English. You please bear with me. I'm not that much in practice of speaking in English, and yes, okay. So that's it for now.